Welcome back to the Design Materials channel. I am Edson Mafuz, architect and professor of architectural design at the School of Architecture, Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre, Brazil. I'm back with another video on architectural design, this time to talk about an important building, the Lever House, its influence in Latin American architecture, and its surprising importance for today's urbanism. First of all, credits. Most of the texts dealing with this building mention Gordon Bunshaft as the only author, but there is enough evidence that the architect Nathalie de Blois was his working partner in this project, a project which was Bunshaft's first really important task. The building that we are going to analyze here has 24 floors, distributed as follows. An open ground floor, which in Europe would be called pilotis, one raised floor covering the entire terrain, the platform, one transition floor, 18 floors forming the main workspaces, and then 3 service floors at the top of the tower, housing the air conditioning, the cooling tower, and the elevator engine room. The building occupies the head of a block formed by 53rd and 54th Streets and Park Avenue. Across the street, diagonally, is the famous Seagram building, designed by Mies van der Rohe and built a few years later. In this drawing, we can see more clearly, perhaps, the relationship between the, the lever house and its block, as well as the relationship with the, the Seagram building. One of the most interesting features of this case is the fact that the lever company had no objective or had no intention to profit from the property. For this reason, it was decided not to build almost 75% of the permitted area, preferring to offer a series of benefits to the city and its inhabitants. Here on the right, we see what would become of the lever house had the architects and the owners decided to fill up the whole possible buildable envelope, which is the gray area that one sees on the left. We, we can see the big difference between what was built and what could be built. The lever house is then characterized by being a building composed of two main parts: a permeable platform that occupies the entire projection of the plot, in a tower at right angles to the street that occupies only 25% of the site area. The tower walls, as they touch the platform, are recessed, which makes the two parts of the scheme have a very clear formal identity, and it is one of the most notable and emulated aspects of the lever house. Lever house in its present situation. Here we can see the neighboring building, which was designed and built, occupying the whole possible envelope, and we can see the difference between the two of them. This one being the result of paying attention to almost a mathematical rule that determined the form of the building, and the lever house as the result of a clear formal intention on the part of its architects. What are then the features that made this building be so admired and later imitated beyond its alleged elegance? One of them uh, its specific volumetric composition, which, at least in the compact center of American cities, was an innovation. This meant the, the volumetric composition consisting of a tower on top of a platform. This meant a new relationship with the surroundings, suggesting greater porosity of the urban fabric. In addition, the decision to allow free public use of most of the ground floor was unprecedented. With regard to technology, it was the first building to use a curtain wall, which did not exist at that time as an industrial product and was developed by the SOM office itself. It was the first building totally glazed and airtight. Also, there was an external window cleaning system by means of a device suspended from the roof. This was also unprecedented, as well as an automatic transport of correspondence inside the building using pneumatic tubes. Leverhouse was met with a combination of praise and criticism, with Louis Mumford and Vincent Scully standing out among the commentators. Interestingly, the same characteristic was praised by some and criticized by others. Leverhouse was praised for its contribution to facilitating the lighting and ventilation of its surroundings, but criticized for, along with Seagram, breaking the urban corridor on Park Avenue. Scully called it non urban because of the small width of the tower, not realizing the platform's important urban role. This picture shows how the architects were careful to align the facades of the building to the existing uh, neighbors. And this is quite important because it shows that the building was not neglecting its relationship with the context. Current criticisms to the effect that the building is not sustainable because of its all glass airtight facades do not make sense, as they apply values from today to a very different period. In the 1950s, artificially air conditioning any building was a demonstration of power and progress. We can very briefly speculate about the sequence of steps the project went through in order to become what it in the end it became. Let's start with the idea of a platform that occupies the whole of the site. The second move could be the tower over the platform. And this is a very rough outline of what the building could become. Third step could be to empty the platform, to make the space underneath the platform open and public. Then there came the separation between tower and platform. Another move could be the opening of that big hole in the middle of the platform, which is essential to the quality of the space underneath the platform, and to end the series of steps, the structure that maintains the building up and is fundamental to give measure to the spaces under the platform. When we see the site, the shape of the site, we understand that it's not a rectangle having an outgrowth on the side of 54th Street. This plan also shows how much of the ground level is free for public use. On the ground floor, services are concentrated at the back of the site. In the platform on the right, there are a number of services that needed more area than the tower plan offered. Here we have on the left the plan of the platform level, where there used to be a cafeteria serving the people working for Lever. And on the right, we see a typical office plan. And it's interesting to know how, in this plan, the distances between the columns are different, generating a more flexible plan. Because if the interior line of the columns were centralized, it would be much more difficult to create a corridor if needed. Step by step through the building elements, which is something we can only do from a very good model, because there is no information available for us to follow a sequence like that. So we go from the parking area, which is underground, and we see the ground level and its permeability, its transparency, the structure, the, the beam structure on the ground level, and then the platform level, the interior of the platform with the big service spaces, structure, the platform with the cafeteria, the first office level, the 18 office levels, the top service area, and finally the building as a whole. The desired permeability of the ground floor is verified both when looking from the outside inwards and in the opposite direction. Here we have a series of views of this very nice space, which is much used by the population who work around the area. The same happens across the road at the Seagram. People go there to have their lunch, to stay a while, to talk to friends, and it's very nice to have this open space right under one of the important buildings of the avenue. Here we see from inside the hall, which is almost the same feeling as being outside, especially because some of the elements enter the hall, like the big planter here. And this is one view of one of the working areas when it was used by Lever. Lever is no longer the owner of the building, it has been sold to some other company. Here we see two drawings referring to the curtain wall. On the left, the original design of the curtain wall. On the right, the renovated curtain wall, also designed by the SOM firm. And here a couple of views of the tower here and of the platform here. A view of the terrace on top of the platform as it is now, with grown trees, which is something very nice because it's the only shadowed or shaded area in the whole of the platform. And two two views more or less after the building was completed. Well, to end this part, it's interesting that sometimes you learn something from a building that makes you look backwards towards some other building that you admire. In this case, I was looking back to the building is that is considered the building that started Brazilian modern architecture. This is the Ministry of Education and Health, a building that was designed with the consultancy of Le Corbusier, who came to Brazil and talked very much with the architects in charge of the building. And in the end, it was designed by a team led by Lucio Costa, the author of the Brasilia Plan. But looking back in retrospect, we feel that it lacks the separation between the low lower part and the tower. But we only see this after knowing what was done at Lever House. In the post-war period, the 1950s and the 1960s, modern architecture is taken up in earnest around the world, especially in Latin America, coming to be seen as a true international style. This must have happened in all of South America, but it is from Brazil and Colombia that we have more information. Before jumping into that, it's just important to see a definition of archetype. And an archetype is considered something to be so good that it has to be imitated. It's a little bit like the definition of model that we saw in the second video of the series. So starting from some Colombian examples, we can restate something which has been said many times in the preceding videos, which is that architectural design is essentially a transformation and adaptation of precedents. And this is really valid when we see the enormous amount of lever house lookalikes built in Latin America, because not one of them is exactly like the lever house. There is always transformations that have to do with the site, the position and the size of the site, that have to do with climate, they have to do with available technology, and so on and so forth. For instance, this example here, the Banco Francés and Italiano, the site is much smaller. It's a corner site, and we can see that the platform is much smaller. It's not elevated. It's not permeable. The tower has different proportions, but the basic relationship platform, transition, and tower is present. Here we have a very, very odd case, because when we compare the picture on the left with the colored one on the right, we may think we have two different buildings. My assumption is that the picture on the left was manipulated. Even before Photoshop, it was possible to manipulate photographs. And I think, or perhaps it suggests, that the architect was so keen on having a building look a lot like uh, Lever House that he asked a photographer to cut a piece of the building which was built. We don't know if it was built at the very beginning of the problem or if it was built afterwards. But the fact is, today, looking at Google Maps, what we find is what we see here in the colored picture. So this only tells us that the the intention to bring the lever house type to South America was so strong that they would resort to this kind of thing, to the manipulation of pictures in order to have it published as such. In some cases, the projects built in South America have reached a high level of architectural quality that leaves almost nothing to be desired in relation to the lever house model. Note in this case and in the next that the concern with some protection is present and the proposed solutions are completely integrated with the other elements. Here you see a very well designed building in which the vertical fins work as solar protection, and uh, we see a situation in which the platform seems to be floating because the ground floor is recessed. This is one solution used many times in order not to have too too heavy a platform. They would put the ground floor back some meters in order for the platform to be able to gain some lightness. Again, we have platform, transition, and tower. The next the next example is also interesting because it takes us back to that definition of the transformation and adaptation, because in this case the tower has very different proportions. It's no longer a kind of thin and long building. It's a building with an almost square plan, but the main elements are there: platform, tower, and one level of transition between the two of them. This is a very nice image because it tells us that the use of the lever house type was not a case of two or three buildings and architects who decided to do it. It was widespread. All these buildings can be considered to carry the lever house type with them. And it comes from a doctoral thesis presented to the School of Architecture in Barcelona. Well, here we jump to a couple of Brazilian examples. This is one of the very good ones by the Rino Levi office in Sao Paulo, and we can see again the elements, the platform, the tower, the transition between them. Again, the ground floor recessed. There are many differences. For instance, that the platform takes up three or four, perhaps two or three levels, whereas at the lever house the platform had only one floor. Also, the the facade of the tower facing the avenue is much more closed than the one at lever house, but the relationship between the buildings to the avenues are the same. Here we see Paulista Avenue in the original example, Park Avenue. In this case, again, there is a total change of proportion and scale. The size of the site is huge. The platform covers the whole block, and the tower is a much more elongated one than the preceding examples. But the three elements are there: platform, transition, tower. Here we see the plans of the building we just saw, with on the right the shopping center, which is on the ground floor, and on the left we see the tower plan, this elongated block. One more. This one is a residential building. in which we see a platform that takes up the strange form of the site, which is a five-sided site. We see that it has a kind of bend here in the middle, and one of the features more noticeable in this building is the way it protects the facade from the sun using this very delicate ceramic element, which is characteristic of Brazilian architecture since the 19th century, and which has been updated by Lucio Costa in the Park Ginley project of the 1930s, if I'm not mistaken. And here, to end the Brazilian part, we see the moment the moment in which the archetype is institutionalized and becomes the urban norm for the central part of the city. This in parts of the city, of the central city of Porto Alegre, the the urban regulations establish that you can build over the whole site up to 4 or 5 stories high, and then you have to have a tower slightly smaller on top of it. And if you follow this to the end, you end up with a very, very unelegant proportion like you see here. It's just a big box on top of a slightly larger big box, and this does not make for great architecture. To finish this video, it's very interesting to mention something that took almost 50 years to be understood, to be perceived and understood. And this is the fact that the tower platform type allows for urban situations that synthesize qualities of pre-modern and modern urbanism. That is, continuous construction in the part that is in contact with the street, with towers with clear formal identity over that platform. In the words of the Spanish architect Helio Pignon, the fortuitous randomness of the contemporary city becomes regulated and accurate randomness when we employ the solution. In other words, fortuitous randomness results from uncoordinated individual attitudes, leading to urban environments as collection of buildings unrelated to each other. On the other hand, regulated and precise randomness implies the existence of an element of agreement between buildings, as can be the presence of a volumetric scheme that guides them. We will see now 3 examples from the work of Pignon that show the use of the lever house type in different situations. In this case, it's a site composed of 3 blocks. There is it's higher here on the top of the illustration, as well as on this side here. What he does is to divide each block into 4 parts, and each one of these 4 parts is treated as a lever house type with a platform that touches the ground and creates a commercial area. And then over the platform, you can have a tower that could be residential or an office block, and if there is enough space, smaller buildings like the low one here and this small pavilion here. A second example shows a kind of base that repeats itself, again creating the commercial environment of the street with tower blocks over them. And the final example shows an avenue treated exactly like this, in which there is uh, the necessary density on the ground floor, which is something that turn cities into vital environments. And then there is some more freedom on top of the platforms so that towers and blocks of different configurations and heights can be built without damaging what is achieved on the ground floor. And this is a view from the ground floor looking down the avenue in a view that is familiar to many South American cities, especially the central areas, which still maintain the traditional urbanism that was used to create those cities. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you come back. The model for the lever house is at the Arquitecturas Exemplares site. Do not forget to subscribe for getting to know about new videos. Take care.